Season 2, Episode 4 of The Chosen is one of my absolute favorite episodes of all time. The creativity in this whole season, but particularly this episode, is really astonishing. The first 9 minutes of this episode are completely dialogue free. There's basically no dialogue whatsoever. It's just music and pantomime through the actions of the actors. It is amazing because you can tell exactly what's going on and no dialogue is needed, which is pretty rare for The Chosen overall. Dialogue is an important piece and one of the strongest pieces of The Chosen as a show, and so when they take out that piece, well, somehow it still works in this episode here, in this intro to this episode. So obviously this is going to take a long time for us to go over. There's a lot of stuff to talk about in this episode overall, so expect several videos about this episode in particular, but let's start off with just this intro, this 9+ minute section here with no dialogue, but I think it might be one of my favorite scenes, my favorite sections in all of The Chosen. So let's break it down scene by scene, moment by moment, from the beginning of Jesse's disability all the way until the ending, where they're coming to present day at the pool of Bethesda and all of that there. For most of the characters in these scenes, we don't know their names, so we'll be talking about them by their roles, such as Jesse's dad or Jesse's mom. But the two characters that we do know are Jesse and Simon throughout this whole section here. So we're going to be referring to them as their names, even though technically in the show we wouldn't know them quite yet. So the first thing that we see here is the fall. Jesse begins to climb a tree as a branch breaks that he's reaching for, and he falls to the ground, permanently disabling himself. This is where he becomes lame, as the Bible says. Now, what does this actually mean? What is the Bible describing here when it says lame? All throughout the Bible, we have examples of lameness and what this is in the Jewish society. This is the first point that I want to bring up, because this is not just an unfortunate event where this kid actually gets hurt, but it's way more than that. And we're going to see that throughout this entire scene. In the Jewish society, being lame is not just a disability that can be overcome and everybody is okay with. In fact, it actually says something about you and your family. It says that your family is cursed, essentially, or that you have some sort of sin that is attached to you or your forefathers. Remember later on when Jesus heals the blind man in Jerusalem. What did people say about him? Why was this man blind to begin with? Is it because of his sin or his parents' sin? For him specifically, there was no accident or anything else that happened. He was blind from birth. And so there must have been some sort of sin that impacted him. And it couldn't be his own sin, right? Because he was born with it. So there's nothing that he did to make God want to give him this blindness in the first place. It must have been his parents or his grandparents or somewhere along his family line that sinned in order for him to have this punishment. That is how disabilities were seen during the first century as well. Now, obviously, Jesus saw past this and he saw that God's glory could be found even in these moments of disability. But for Jesse during this time, this would have been a life sentence of him being shunned from society. Not only could he not participate in certain things, such as synagogue or regular sort of Jewish living, but he would just be shunned from everybody. Nobody would want to be in contact with him because he would be deemed a sinful person. We even see references to lameness throughout the scriptures. Obviously in Leviticus, we see as Aaron is told that the priests and the people that are to approach the temple itself cannot be lame or have any blemishes or different things like that make them have these disabilities. And in an amazing passage in Isaiah chapter 35, verse 6, we see that the lame will leap like a deer. In fact, in that passage, it talks about the lame, the mute, and the blind, how they'll all be healed and be in the glory of God whenever his kingdom comes, whenever the Messiah comes to fill this world with healing and love and fix the things that are broken. Now, throughout all of Jesus' ministry, we see this happen over and over again. We see the lame walk, we see the mute speak, we see the blind see, and that's because of the restoration that is happening there. But Jesus is not just healing them, he's also saving them, right? He's redeeming them from their sin. And I think that is really a piece of this that we miss oftentimes in the healing of Jesus. It's not just that he's healing them and they go on their merry way and they forget about everything that's happened. No, they give glory to God because of his redemption that's come, not just the healing that's come. And I think that's really, really important. Now, of course, we're not going to talk about the healing of Jesse in this video. We're just talking about the intro. But remember, all of this context leads in just from this very first shot of Jesse falling from the tree, because this is not just a moment where he's hurt, but also a moment when the world perceives him as sinful. So we have to remember that as we move forward. In fact, we get many things that confirm this suspicion as we head through the rest of this intro section. First off, we have a doctor that comes and checks out Jesse. The doctor immediately tells his parents that he is paralyzed from the feet up to his waist and that he has no mobility to do anything there. There's not much that they can do about it either. Here is where we first see the mentality of how Jesse is going to be treated, because in the very next scene after the doctor visits, we actually see that there are a bunch of different kids playing, and they do not include Jesse when he's a younger child. Why is that? Well, it's because he's not welcome. He's not like the other kids. And not only that, but most likely there's some sort of sinful thing that's happening there. So because of this, Jesse's father actually invites a witch doctor to come and heal Jesse. Now, this would have been a pretty common thing. We actually hear about this with the woman with the issue of blood as well. She had sought out every other remedy to her malady. During that time, there were all sorts of remedies and medicines and amulets and different magical things that you could try. In fact, Mark chapter 5 talks about how she had suffered a great deal under many different doctors that she had trusted throughout this time to heal her, and none of that worked. But throughout this scene with Jesse, we see that the witch doctor is trying different remedies, lighting incense, and rubbing on him what looks like either wine or blood with a hyssop branch, maybe? It could be some other type of plant, but that's what it looks like to me. And he's obviously wearing garb that is not Jewish in style and is very much dark, is what it feels like. Now, during this time, we actually see his father and his mother kind of standing off in the corner. They've given a lot of money to this witch doctor, and now they're kind of worried for what's going to happen. Obviously, this doesn't work. Jesse is not healed, and now they're out of a lot of money. One thing that we do notice during this scene as well is that Jesse's mother, at least we assume it's his mother. We never actually saw if it's his mother or not, but Jesse's father's wife, I guess, is pregnant during this time, of course, with Simon, who we're about to meet in just a little bit. So going into this next scene, we actually see that Jesse and Simon's mother dies while she's on the birthing table. This, of course, is a horrible thing, but it would have been much more common during the first century. So it makes a lot of sense there. Not that everybody died on the birthing table, obviously, but that it was much more common. In fact, as she falls back on the birthing table and she passes out or passes away, you see as the husband begins to freak out and doesn't know what to do, but then the midwife goes straight into action as the baby has not been delivered yet. And so because the mom had passed away, the baby now has to come out, and she gives her somewhat of a C-section. We don't actually get into that portion of it, but we do see her approaching with a knife. I wanted to point out something that I found really interesting about this moment in this section. We see that the midwife has to cut out Simon the Zealot to come into the world. I think this is such a cool connection, and the knife that she's using even looks a little bit similar to the Sakari that we see the Zealots having later on. Not a perfect replica. I don't think it's the same knife that we see in both places, but it is kind of interesting that she would use a knife like that to bring Simon into the world. Maybe a little bit of foreshadowing of who he was to become. I wonder if Dallas meant for that to actually be the case for this episode. And connected to that, a really tiny note about the timeline here, the Zealots only operated from about 6 BC to around 70-ish AD. And so this would have actually been before the Zealots were a thing in history, because we know that Simon the Zealot is around 40 years old, and we know that his brother Jesse had been lame for 38 years. So somewhere in that period would have been long before the Zealots actually started, and then they would have started later on in their lives, which could be a part of this section we're going to dive into here. I just thought that timeline piece was quite interesting, although we can't always trust the timeline when it comes to the Chosen. That's been proven. So moving on from this point, we get a few really interesting moments. Of course, now that the mother has passed away, Jesse and Simon's father has to deal with things on his own. We see a scene where Jesse is taking care of Simon and the father is preparing dinner and getting everything ready, but you can see he's overwhelmed and he can't handle it on his own. In fact, he even burns himself trying to cook dinner. This leads us to the next point, which immediately shows us Jesse and Simon playing. They're definitely getting along now. They're a little bit older, but we see that the father is about to remarry. And this gets into the section that I want to talk about next, which is Jewish marriage. What does this even look like? Why is this important? Obviously, he wants help around the house. He wants a mother for his children, but this would have been a thing of status as well, right? He wants someone in his house, a wife that can take care of things so that he can work and do different things beyond that as well. We don't know more of this story, obviously, of what profession he had or anything like that, but especially during this time, he would have been much less of a pariah in the community, as his son is lame and now he doesn't have a wife. It would have made him a bit more normalized, if that makes any sense. So let's talk about marriage overall and kind of what we should be expecting to see with this. Now, this is a unique circumstance, as these people aren't getting married for the first time, but rather he is marrying a younger bride that he's bringing into the family. We don't know the circumstances necessarily surrounding this, but we do see a few key things that lead us to understand Jewish culture a little bit better. The first thing is that the father brings his daughter to her new husband in order to see what life is like and to see kind of what the family is doing. Of course, the father is going to give his daughter to this man, and this is going to be a contract, right? So this is what they call the ketubah. This is a marriage contract that you bring, and this is basically your engagement. That's most likely what we're seeing here in this first scene, is the father bringing his daughter in order to fulfill the ketubah and make that contract known to both parties. This is like an engagement, but it's not as loose as an engagement is today. If you're engaged today, you could be not engaged tomorrow, and it's not a big deal. However, the kind of disclaimers and different parts of this contract would have been very serious. And if you tried to get out of this contract, there would have been consequences for it, absolutely. It's very important not only for the man to have his wife, but mostly for the wife to have her husband, because he is the one that's going to provide for her, to protect her in the world where, well, it's really dangerous for a lot of these women to be alone. This is why we don't really see women traveling on their own, or for example, why the Bible is so clear about helping widows, because women didn't have a lot of agency in this world during this time, and it was really important to help them and to have protection for them for this time. Now, after the ketubah is signed, we see a wedding ceremony under a chuppah. Now, this, of course, we've seen previously in season 1, episode 5 of The Chosen, when Jesus attends a wedding in Cana.
I think it might be a little roomier on this side.
Perfect.
No?
The chuppah is crooked.
However, here we're seeing the ceremony itself as the two parties are coming together, and the rabbi is basically pronouncing them husband and wife. He's bringing them together, and they're drinking from the same cup. This shows that they are now one flesh. They are one family, and we see their kids playing as well. In the scene directly after the wedding, we see as Simon is now playing with a group of friends, but Jesse is kind of left out. It's the same that we saw before when he was a young child. He wasn't being allowed to play the games or to be with the other kids. However, this is where things begin to change, and we see a new relationship beginning to form with Simon and Jesse. Of course, they're brothers, and they seem to be close, but here that relationship comes closer and closer and closer, as Simon leads the other group of kids over to Jesse so that they can all dance together. Even though Jesse is different, he welcomes him into the group, and that wouldn't have happened without his brother Simon. This is the main purpose of the next few scenes we see in this section. We see as Jesse and Simon grow older, and somehow they grow closer in age as well. These actors look like they're the same age. In fact, there are some times when Jesse's actor looks younger than Simon's actor, which of course we know he's several years, probably a decade younger. So it's a little bit strange that it happens. However, we do see that they become closer and closer as they get older, leading us to the main scene that starts the separation of the two brothers. While we don't know the actual location of where the boys grew up, we can assume that it's Jerusalem through these moments here. Actually, looking back at this footage here, it definitely seems like they are in Jerusalem here in this scene for a few reasons. First of all, it seems like they're in a more urban area for sure, a bigger city of some sort, but also these blocks right here. These are Herodian blocks. If you look in Jerusalem today, you'll see a lot of these around, especially the temple area. So I assume this is shot maybe in the Utah set back in season 2. I'm not 100% sure, but that would be my guess here, as these Herodian blocks definitely they shout Jerusalem. So yeah, that's my guess here for sure. Now, as they go through the city, they see a lot of different things, but one of the days that we see here is, of course, when a Roman soldier attacks a local citizen. This, of course, fires up Simon. Jesse knows that there's nothing that he could really do about it, so I'm sure he's not as emotionally invested. He just probably accepts that it's the way that it is. However, Simon cannot. He wants to get revenge. He seems really angry in this moment. to the point where he goes and talks to a group of people, and this is where he gets his invitation to join the Zealots. This, of course, is a terrorist group, a terrorist organization that attacked the Romans and other people during their time in rule over the Israelites in the first century. Like I said before, this group wasn't around for a super long time. In fact, this was probably close to the beginning of the Zealots' journey in the timeline of actual history. So if Simon was something like 15 years old here, it would mean that the Zealots are in their first 5 to 10 years of operation, and they often did their operations around Jerusalem because it's the holy city where a lot of these things took place. So it would make a lot of sense actually that he would be recruited here as a younger kid that they want to indoctrinate into their society and to build into a strong zealot assassin. Yeah, it actually makes sense, and I think it works really, really well here. Of course, we see Jesse looking on towards him as he knows what's kind of happening. He sees that something bad is happening, but I don't know if he knows exactly what quite yet. He kind of shakes his head, telling Simon no, but Simon continues to receive the papers that are given to him by the recruiters. And of course, the next day, he leaves a note on his bed, and that's the last time that Jesse sees Simon for a very long time. This is where we see the real separation of the brothers, and they go on their two separate paths. Of course, Simon goes to the Zealots. He finds this underground hidden network of Zealots, and he begins to train with them, while Jesse needs to figure out what to do with his life. It seems as if his father is not super involved anymore. Maybe he passes away. Maybe something else happens during that time. But we see that Jesse begins to live his own life and eventually ends up at the Pool of Bethesda. So let's talk about that real quick and the theory behind that, the thoughts behind the Pool of Bethesda itself. The Pool of Bethesda is thought by many historians to basically be a giant mikveh, actually two giant mikvahs, one to the north and one to the south. Now, in one of these pools, essentially there was a geyser of some sort that would bubble up and make the water move and swirl in this pool. The theory was during the time that this was some sort of god that basically stirred up the waters, and whoever got to the water first would be healed of their malady. So because of this kind of folklore that was going on with the pool itself, well, a lot of people began to travel here. Not just normal people, but everybody with sicknesses, from blindness to lameness to anything else that you could think of, sores, whatever else, right? There would be people around this pool all the time just waiting for the water to bubble up. So how does this even, present itself to the ancient world? Remember what I said earlier about Jesse. Jesse was disabled, and they didn't just think he was disabled, oh, poor Jesse, but many people probably wanted nothing to do with him. In fact, look at this entire intro of this scene here, of this episode here. We see that nobody interacts with Jesse except for his family, right? We never see anybody outside of that interact with Jesse whatsoever. I think that's important because, well, it means that he's utterly alone. Everybody has abandoned him, and the only person that he had, his brother, has now abandoned him as well. Essentially, his brother is dead to him, and he has nobody else in the world to rely on. Even the people at the pool are his competition. So these other people that are also sick or also lame or also dealing with these maladies, they don't care about him at all because they want to be the first ones to the pool. And nobody has ever helped him to get into the pool. They've never tried to help him get healed because, of course, he lives in a selfish world where everybody else wants to serve themselves. And what can you expect? A Pharisee or a Sadducee or one of the normal Jewish people to come help you? Well, definitely not. Why? Because you're a sinner. You're a horrible person. God has cursed you on this earth because of what you have. Your disability shows you as such. So Jesse, this is a way sadder story than I think a lot of us give it credit for. He is utterly alone in the world. He has nobody. He probably doesn't talk to anybody. Maybe some of the people at the pool will talk to him from time to time, but certainly they are not his friend. And they probably want nothing to do with him either. All of them are trying to get pure. All of them are trying to get right with God again. So it's a hard, hard life for Jesse here. Now, on the other side of things with Simon, we see that he begins his training and gets stronger and stronger in the order of the Zealots. Now, specifically with the Zealots, we're not talking about just generic Zealots that are kind of this protesting group, right? We're talking about a specific sect of the Zealots, which are called the Sicarii. Now, they are called this because of the weapon that they carry, called the Sicarii dagger. So the Sicarii are assassins. They are really meant to take out Rome and to lead revolts. The biggest revolts that they led were actually after the death and resurrection of Jesus, after Simon gets out. So he was never a part of any of those, obviously through history, but there are definitely moments where he could have been part of different assassinations and different things that are happening with the zealots earlier on. Now, I assume that he was part of this group for almost, if not over 20 years of his life, which means he's been there for a very long time. However, in The Chosen, it does kind of pan out to be like, oh, he's just really starting his journey here, which is quite interesting because he never like really gets into the depths of what he's done before or where he is going. However, we do see him accept a mission to basically take out a high Roman official in Jerusalem when he's there. And so maybe he's done this before, maybe he's killed several people in the past. We don't really get a huge understanding of his history there. It's one of the things I wish we knew more about with Simon the Zealot overall. Has he done a lot of things in the past that are eye-opening, or has he not really gotten into that world quite yet, but he's been really mentally charged to be against Rome and against the authorities of the Jews, etc. So yeah, we don't really know, but it would be interesting to learn more. Since this whole section doesn't have any dialogue, let's talk about cinematography real fast. I think throughout this entire section, it's amazing. I even love some of these match cuts that they do between Simon kind of growing older and the same thing with Jesse later on. Really, really well thought out. I think the one with Simon works a lot better than the one with Jesse, although I think they're both very good. I think there's a lot of different moments here where we see just some amazing cinematography being done. And I love the shot, the crane shot of all the people going into the water as they're looking to get healed in the water as well. There's some funny behind the scenes clips with this as well. Then finally, this section ends with Simon kind of graduating into his full zealotry. And then we have Jesse at the pool, completely alone and abandoned by everyone. This is a really, really hard life for both of them. I don't think Jesse, knows about his brother or where he is. I don't think Simon really knows and sees where Jesse is either, but they're both obviously struggling through life. Simon may be feeling a little bit better right now, but of course he's going to come to a realization as well later in this episode and in the next few episodes as he seeks out Jesus, which of course we're going to talk about soon. Let me know your thoughts on this episode here, this section right here. We're going to dive deeper into Atticus Aemilius Pulcher, as well as some of the other unique things about this episode that bring in a lot of understanding to Jewish culture and a really cool biblical moment with the healing at the Pool of Bethesda, which we'll talk about as well. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on this episode, and we will see you on the next one. Peace.